paralyzing his victim with his gaze, I standing with my family at the edge of this immortal forest. I tell this story because telling this story is what I must do. I'm going to keep going here. 20-some years ago, before technology changed the world, you had to be the one?
It's off with hope.
Okay, so here's the thing about that particular ring. I need you to change that.
I need to crawl under my chair.
Oh, so it happens. The thing is, so right back in 2008, I had this weird rash that started on my neck, and then it got kind of weirder, and then I was like, I did work on the internet, and I was really uncomfortable. I couldn't sleep, and I realized, oh, I got shingles. And it was like really weird. And then I was like in Minneapolis doing a conference thing, and I was like walking to go to my talk in the morning, and I had like psychotic vertigo. Like everyone gets vertigo sometimes. Oh, I'm a little dizzy. Oh, that's not vertigo. Vertigo is like when it's like, whoom, I think you're on a ride and you're like spinning like you're in a clothes dryer or something. I had that vertigo, where like I was like, sit down now, because otherwise I'm falling. And ended up, I went to the University of Michigan Medical Center, and they're like, oh yeah, you've got shingles, ha ha ha. They like laughed at me. And I was like, yeah. Well, it turned out it was in this weird spot where it actually got into my inner ear, and that's upset my equilibrium. And then it also gave me Bell's palsy. It's called Ramsay-Hunt syndrome. Bell's palsy is where half your face is paralyzed. And I've never had paralysis before, and it sucks. I mean, it's really bad. I'd like tape my eyelid shut, and like drool was always coming out of the right side. I mean, it was like really a disaster. And I was like, we all try and do, handle things holistically and alternatively in our family with our medicine stuff. And so I went to my doctor, who's an MD, but he's also a naturopath. And so we tried, and I said to him, he's like, well, I'm going to give you, prednisone because you need to have this. And the steroid stuff, and I said, I there's bad side effects on that. I don't want that. And he said, no, listen, hold on a second. Like, it's good to be. Some things we do as we can naturally. Some things we need to bring out the howitzer. You need a howitzer. And I was like, whoa. He said, you could have permanent nerve damage if you don't watch it. And so I was like, so for like 3 weeks, I couldn't sleep because it was all in my scalp and everything. And so I was like, stay up all night reading books. And so I had to move into a different bedroom, and then the only time I could sleep was when my acupuncture person would like nail me with all these little needles. When I would catch a nap, the ringtone I used was that xylophone thinger. And so I have really bad flashbacks. Not trying to make you feel worse. I'm just saying, change the ringtone.
You want to sit down or something?
No. I recovered from it, but it did take a while. That's not. Anyway, let me just read this one passage, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the book, and then we can do questions and answers and stuff. Just sorry. God, I'm getting old. 20-some years ago, before technology changed the world and terrorism struck fear into the hearts of all citizens, before boys in trench coats stalked and murdered classrooms full of innocent children in schools across this fair land, before the oceans were thick with oil slicks and the government ceased to govern and Bill Gates set out to love the world to death and hurricanes became powerful enough to stagger entire cities and toxic children were drugged into oblivion to drive up the profits of big pharma and genetically modified foodstuffs were forced upon us without us knowing we needed to care, before smoking marijuana and gay marriages became passé, before gay people became just like anyone else and weed became just another source of tax revenue. This was even before another famous Bill, the one surnamed Clinton, became famous for his choice of cigars. It seems like ages ago, looking back on it, no smartphones, no on-demand, nary an iPad in sight. So long ago, yes, this story begins in 1990. So it really was a different age. And that's when this story takes place in 1990, sort of the cusp of the digital era, right? And I wanted that for a reason. I wanted that sense of innocence. Information travels so rapidly now. I didn't want to do that. So the story, A Sudden Light, is a multi-generational family saga. Set against the backdrop of the timber industry in the Northwest. If you want to talk about the history in the Northwest, you have to talk about trees. That's where all the money came from. That's where all the wealth came from. But more than that, it's a story about fathers and sons and how that relationship ripples through a family, through generations. It's a story of our relationship with nature, about how we deal with nature, the sense of, the constant question we always have, conservation versus development, and these balance. But for me, it's really about seeing the unseen. It's about peeling back the layers. It's about trying to see behind the veil of what we think of as all that we know. There are things, there are connections out there. So in order to really put you in the mood of the story, we have to do a visualization exercise. So pretend you're like in an acting class in 9th grade or something. So imagine this. You are Trevor Riddell. You're 14 years old. It's 1990. You have had a kind of a nice childhood growing up. You're an only child. You've grown up in rural Connecticut. Your father has always been sort of a remote figure, but he's nice. He's pleasant, but he doesn't ever tell anything about his family's history. There are no photos of his family in the house. He's very reluctant to talk about certain things. He builds wooden boats for a living in the traditional wooden boat building style, so it's very painstaking, very meticulous style, but he's good at it. Your mother, you love very much. She's quite brilliant. She's originally from England, and she got her PhD from Harvard, as you now know, and but she's never done anything with her brilliance, and you always wonder why. But there are books everywhere in the house. She reads constantly, and there's everything surface is stacked up with books in that little farmhouse you live in Connecticut, and so as a result, you at 14 years old are quite well read. Then something happens, the bottom falls out of the economy, some bad business decisions get made. Your father, his business goes under, and he has to declare bankruptcy. As a result, the house that you grew up in is sold at auction. And then, under the stress of this financial tension, your parents separate. Your mother goes back to England, where she's from, to spend the summer with her family, and your father takes you to Seattle, to where he originally grew up, Riddell House. You're going to see for the first time your aunt and your grandfather, who you've never met. There's a mission involved. Your father has a plan. He actually grew up on this big estate in north of Seattle, 200 acres, and it's valuable land. It's on a bluff overlooking Puget Sound. So he and his sister have devised this plan that they're going to sell off this property to a developer who is going to split it up into a bunch of plots and make McMansions, and then everyone will live happily ever after, because once you have money, all problems are solved, right? We all know that. Thing is they're having a little bit of a problem because they don't own the land. Grandpa Samuel owns the land, and Grandpa Samuel doesn't want to sell the land. Grandpa Samuel is convinced that the ghost of his dead wife dances for him in the 3rd floor ballroom at night, and he doesn't want to leave the house because then he would lose his connection with his dead wife. So you go to this house. So imagine this: you fly across the country, you drive through Seattle, you get to this gated community, and all these really very wealthy houses, and then you get to this one kind of broken down area, which is not just really kind of in disrepair, weeds and so forth, and fences broken. You get to a meadow, and you see this gigantic meadow of dead grass, and on the other side of it, there's this huge mansion, unbelievably large, made with trees as columns to support the roof, as if it's being hewn from the forest, and you look across. So if you've been to Seattle, you'll know this. You look to your right, and there's Puget Sound glistening in the sunlight in the summer, and on the other side, the Kitsap Peninsula, and beyond that, the Olympic Mountains, which are so beautiful over there. And your father says, "That's the house I grew up in," which comes as a huge surprise. Well, the house was built by Elijah Riddell back in the turn of the 20th century. Elijah Riddell was a hugely wealthy timber baron, but all the money has been lost by succeeding generations. All that remains is this house and this land. There's nothing else left. So you go to the house, and as you get closer, you see that it's really kind of not in good shape. It's kind of listing to one side. It's kind of, the paint is peeling off the window panes. It smells bad. It just looks like it's in great disrepair. You open the front door and you go inside, and it smells of must and dust and decay. But it's really nice woodwork and oriental rugs. It's expensive stuff at one point, right? You look to your right, and there's the gentleman's parlor there, and it's dark and oaken, and it's got lions as like the andirons of the fireplace, and there's a big painting next to the fireplace. It's 8 feet tall, and it's of an old man with long white hair, and he's got a suit on. He's got a cane in one hand. His other hand is reaching out over the painting as if it's going to pull you into the painting with him. That's Elijah Riddell, your great-great-grandfather, your father says, as he comes up behind you. He takes you down the hallway, and you go into the kitchen at the back of the house. And there you see your Aunt Serena. When your father said you had an aunt, you were like, oh yeah, okay, everybody's got an aunt, right? An old remote aunt living in some weird place in Seattle. Okay, I get that. You know, she's probably like old and dowdy and, you know, Mrs. Doubtfire. Oh, little child, let me pinch your cheek. You know, yeah, no. You know, your Aunt Serena's 35 years old and she's smoking hot. I mean, she is a Southern belle. I mean, she's wearing beautiful dresses with tight waists and long skirts, and she always walks around the house barefoot. It's better for the posture, she says. But she keeps her toenails painted this mesmerizing color of blue. You can't take your eyes away from them. It's just, and she knows that you're looking as well. And so everything you say to her, she deflects. Any question you ask, she gives you a fake answer. It's all a game with her. You can't ever get a straight answer out of her. And so you can imagine how this can mess with the mind of a 14-year-old boy. You go back out onto the front porch and you meet for the first time your grandfather, Grandpa Samuel. He looks a lot like the guy in the painting. He's wearing all black pants, black t-shirt, on the blazing veranda, facing west. The sun is just beating down on him, and he's drinking some lemonade. And you look closely at his shirt, and his shirt has words on it. So you look closely and you read the words, and the words say, God was my co-pilot, but then we crashed in the mountains, and I had to eat him. That's funny, you say. He's, what? That's funny, your shirt. What it says, that's funny. Huh? What? And he looks down and he reads it upside down. He says, oh, Serena dresses me. So, you get a little idea of the relationship that's going on here. So 1990, this is before the Xbox, this is before Game Boys, this is before the internet being everywhere. You're a 14-year-old kid, and you've been taken back to this place. Your father is reticent at best. Your mother is a distant phone call away, many time zones away in England. Your grandfather may or may not have dementia. And your aunt, everything with her is a game. She won't give you a straight answer. What do you do? How do you decode this? And you have a lot of free time, by the way, because it's the summer and there's nothing to do and there's nowhere to go. What do you do? Well, if you're 14 years old, I suggest you start to explore things. You start looking down those weird hallways. You go down into the basement where no one's been for who knows how many decades. You realize that there's a cottage on the property, another little house that was for the caretaker many years ago. And what's going on in there? And you start digging around and opening doors that haven't been opened in a long time, and finding maybe little secret hatches and things like that. And maybe you discover there's some journals that someone had kept, or maybe some letters between relatives from years ago. And then you start to hear the whispers in the house. You start to think that the house is talking to you. Are you going crazy? Maybe. But geez, those whispers are awfully compelling. I want to read one more quick passage and then tell you one more quick story, then we can do something. Chapter 30, Behold this Dreamer. At this point, Trevor is convinced that the ghost of his great-great-grandfather's son, Benjamin Riddell,